Hello, I'm Kathryn Lopez from National Review. Leah Libresco Sargeant, thank you so much for joining me. You are, among many other things, the author of the upcoming book. I see it in the background. It is The Dignity of Dependence, coming
That's
out
right.
October, right?
That's right. October 1st, Feast of St.
Excellent.
Therese.
And you can pre-order it on Amazon.
That's right.
And you have a Substack, Other Feminisms,
hmm
and your writing can be seen in the Dispatch, among other places. I know you have a new column there. And anything else you want to plug while we're at it?
And I'm a senior policy analyst for the Niskanen Center.
Right. See, I knew I was going to butcher your title for your real job, your actual real job. And actually, that is one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you about the child tax credit that Congress is debating right now, and because you have so many gifts, and your heart is a big piece of it, but you also have something that we need more of in the pro-life movement, which you are a data geek and in the best of ways. And you have the heart that goes along with it. But so you do love to look at the data. And I find that very helpful, especially on issues like this one. Obviously, we're not going to win over hearts and minds over numbers, but it helps with a lot of conversations in many cases, especially with the skeptical. And so, can you start from that kind of vantage point, talking about why the child tax credit is important to more than a pro lifer who wants to support families? Why this makes economic sense?
Sure. So I think the most basic way of talking about the child tax credit is, it's about, above all, treating families fairly. It's not even necessarily about putting a thumb on the scale for families, so that's something I personally would like to do. But the way you can think about it is the way we set up the tax code, we're supposed to treat people with the same, available income to them equally. And if you have a household with two grown-ups, no kids, with a certain amount of disposable income that comes in, there's a certain amount available to be taxed. And we have a household with two grown-ups making that same amount of income and two kids. It's unrealistic for the government to act as though they have the same
Right.
disposable income available for taxation as that family with no kids. The kids eat, they go through a lot of books, a lot of toys, a lot of pants. We're potty training, so a lot of pants at the moment. And that means there's less money available for the government to tax. So the child tax credit is, first and foremost, a way of treating families equally to other families so that they're taxed based on their plausible disposable income, with some money being set aside as non-taxable for their kids. Now, the way we have this set up, we try and make sure that that child tax credit is reaching a wide range of families. And because of that, there's two parts of it. And this is where we get into the wonkier part. I think it explains kind of how it's helping different families. You have the non-refundable part of the credit, and that's money you only get if you owe income tax. And in total, the tax credit is worth about $2,000 right now. So that's $300 is non-refundable at the moment. And 1,700 is refundable, which means you can get that money back even if you don't personally owe income tax. And the reason is, both that we want to make sure families get a strong start, and families realistically are paying other kinds of taxes. Families pay income tax, 15% on every dollar you earn. They pay sales tax. So that refundable part helps reach families who are poor, who, thanks to the expansion of the standard deduction, no longer owe income tax, but who the government wants to make sure is still seeing those other taxes, et cetera, canceled out. And so that's where we are. The child tax credit reaches a pretty wide range of families.
Mhm.
For families that earn enough, you get that full $2,000. For families that don't owe income tax, that 1,700 phases in with how much money you make. So the more money you make, the more of that tax you earn back for your family.
Does it surprise you that it polls as well as it does? I mean, there are a few issues that have what comes close to a consensus as I should say more broadly, paid family leave, right?
Yeah.
Child tax credit, you can have some people fall off here and there on both sides.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is it's always been a bipartisan endeavor. And the most recent child tax credit expansion, that lasted more than just a 1 year experiment, came under President Trump in the Tax
Hmm.
Cut and Jobs Act in his first term. So that took the $1,000 child tax credit and doubled it to 2,000. They did this by getting rid of the dependent exemption that didn't serve as many families as well, and it locked in that higher value. So, you know, it's popular because everyone is part of a family. I always talk about child benefits being universal benefits. So whether, you personally grow up and get married, have kids, or whether you're single, or whether you're consecrated religious or a priest, everyone benefits from the child tax credit, regardless of whether you have kids, because you benefit from it when you are a child and when it supports your parents in raising you. So there's no one out there, whatever their own fertility plans are, who doesn't benefit from the CTC.
Well, and then of course we get into the cultural issue, which obviously everyone benefits, or at least I would hope it would be obvious that everyone benefits from us having healthy families. And a way to support healthy families is to make sure they're being treated fairly when it comes to taxes. And I wanted to have this conversation in part because we're waiting to see how this all shakes out with the big beautiful bill, which I think is the most ridiculous title ever. And say with this straight face, but that is ongoing. So it's a live issue in terms of policy. But we're also approaching the third anniversary of the Dobbs decision and the end of Roe versus Wade. And we're also living in this cultural milieu where people are talking about natalism and it's good to have children. And I think that conversation needs to be unpacked a little bit. Not children by any means necessary, and in any scenario, of course. But this is an important piece of it, and especially for conservatives who are skeptical of paid family leave more generally. This is an important time to hash out those debates, and also, frankly, if you're more libertarian and you're skeptical of a lot of paid family leave conversations, well, you probably want to get it done when there are Republicans in office.
Absolutely. I think there's a real pressure that, I welcome, and I think it's appropriate after Dobbs to ask conservatives, social conservatives, all right, we've heard what you won't let families do. We've heard you won't let families kill children in the womb. And of course, to that I say, thank goodness, right?
Right.
But then there's the question of after that, what will you let families do?
Mm-hmm.
You're forbidding parents from destroying their children, but how will you help them raise their children? And I think it's really important to focus on where the government can do a really good job helping with that and where it can't, right? Like
Right.
the government can't babysit my kids, like personally, um, but it can give me the money I need to take paid family leave, to hire sitters of my own, to take time for postpartum recovery. And so when we think about where are our highest impacts, we're really saying, all right, well, the main way government helps is doing one of two things. It's telling you you can't do things that you definitely shouldn't do, and that's abortion bans, and that you're going to be freer to do things, usually by moving money around, that you ought to have the freedom to do. And that's subsidizing parents in making good choices for their families. And I think the nice thing is there's a pretty wide academic literature that to succeed at this, we don't need to micromanage families' spending. We don't need families sending in, every receipt for, and then my kid needed a new pair of shoes, so now I need this new pair of shoes. And we don't need to have the government open a shoe store for parents where they go shop with special vouchers, a lot of bad ways, centralized ways of setting that up. What we've got is a robust academic literature that says when parents receive CTC money and CTC expansions, they do spend it on what matters for their kids. They spend it on food bills, on rent, on clothes for their kids. And it makes a big difference for them to have the flexibility to spend it on what matters for their family. I know, there have been times when folks in the Senate have raised questions about, well, where does this money go? And the good news is we know where it goes. It goes to the kids. Families always have expenditures that they can make to help their kids at almost every income level. The CTC does a great job of empowering parents to make the right choice for their family rather than having that choice dictated to them by the government as a condition of the support.
And going back to your initial point about fairness, this is not like the government's giving free money. This is this is appreciating the reality, first of all, that parenting is a sacrifice, and it always will be, and it should be in many ways, because it's indicative of your life changing and you devoting this commitment to a child or to children, and so it's only natural that it would be a sacrifice, right? But acknowledging that reality financially is showing what we value. um, and so, as you point out, you and I are so grateful that Roe versus Wade is no more. Um, and that says something about what a country values. And obviously, it's still being hashed out in the states and in many regards. But also saying financially we're going to be fair to families. Also says, all right, we value this. And also on the point of policy and financial policy, and as you mentioned, we say, okay, this is, or at least all the Supreme Court did is say, okay, states, you now have the right to regulate abortion, which the states didn't have under Roe versus Wade. So it's not even like we made this huge value statement.
It's the same. It's the same as in the recent Skermetti case that just came down this week,
Right.
where it's neither saying there's a national ban on transgender treatments for young kids, nor is it saying that states are obliged to permit it. It's just saying that this is a matter that the states can handle based on what they feel the preponderance of the evidence supports.
And with the transgender procedures, thanks be to God, the Supreme Court didn't do what the Supreme Court did on abortion, which was for 50 years say you can't, states, you can't do anything about this. So Tennessee is free and states are free to protect children, thanks be to God. There have been some helpful in the last couple of months, and then the last 3 years studies. Charlotte Lozier had one recently that pointed out that we have more actually federally funded community health clinics than we have Planned Parenthoods. So that's a good thing. Now, it's partially a good thing. They were trying to make the point that Planned Parenthood clinics don't give a full holistic treatment of healthcare that they claim to, and the community-based federally funded clinics do. That doesn't make them pro-life clinics. One has to be quick to point out. But conservatives need to be not afraid to have a debate about, okay, well, are we going to make a more of a commitment to federally funded health clinics? Or are we going to make a commitment, a financial commitment on the state level, as some states like Texas have done, to make sure that maybe faith-based clinics are funded? These are conversations that absolutely have to have, because it's not enough to say we're going to ban abortion. We need to ban abortion, but then we need to follow up in a robust way so that women and families are actually being supported.
Yes, and I think that's where we've seen some good movement on the states of things like Medicaid expansion, both expanding, what range of women can receive Medicaid help with their birth so that they don't have to pay anything on delivery when they're poorer, and expanding how long they're on Medicaid for, so that a woman who delivers a baby stays on for a full year and can have that time to fully recover and deal with any complications of her delivery. But I think what people respond to a lot, including folks who are pro-choice for good faith reasons, they say, well, look, pregnancy asks a lot of a woman, and we know the most common reason women choose abortion is for financial pressures. It's not because they care nothing about the baby. They don't have a principled choice against the dignity of the baby, but they're really afraid that they can't take care of the baby that's coming, and often the baby who's already here.
Right.
So I think the more things at both the state and federal level that really respond to that reality, that there are a lot of women who don't feel like abortion is really a pro-choice option for them. It
Right.
feels like their only choice. And I think that's also where pro-lifers and pro-choicers do have the opportunity to work together.
Right.
There shouldn't be anything threatening to a sincere pro-choicer about expanding a woman's options to choose life. And relieving that financial pressure, allows her to make the choice she wants to make, and which often is the choice for life. And that's where you can kind of blend in the academic literature and then those personal experiences. Folks have done sidewalk counseling. I know you've been out there yourself, right? Know often how low the amount of money is a woman needs to be able to feel safe choosing
Right,
life.
right, right.
It's often a gap that, pregnancy, crisis pregnancy clinics can help her close because she's just in a really tight spot and needs a little more breathing room.
Right,
The
right.
TC is a big part of that. No, it doesn't do everything I'd like it to do. I like that both the House and the Senate have different proposals in this bill for how to expand it. They want to expand that top line number, the total amount that's available to families. The House wants to bump it up to 2,500 from 2,000 right away, and the Senate wants to move it to 2,200, but to increase a little faster over time versus the House increases a little slower. So to make a technical thing pretty brief, the House starts higher, the Senate starts lower, but over time, the Senate overtakes the House plan.
Hmm. Hmm.
Both good. I'm for higher numbers faster, personally. But most of this expansion is all coming for wealthier families, families that already owe enough tax to claim that full amount of the credit. But a married family with two kids needs to be earning, I think it's about $48,000 a year to be able to fully get that credit.
Hmm.
And if they're not, then this expansion means nothing to them. They don't see any extra money. So what I'd love to see is see that refundable portion expanded too. And one of the easiest ways to do this, and this is a little technical, but I'll take you with me here, is just that when I talked about that we phase it in with how much money you make, we start that phase in after a little blackout period. So the first $2,500 you earn as a household doesn't count for the CTC. You only start earning it after that point. And I'd love to see the House, the Senate working together get rid of that blackout. It doesn't serve any functional purpose. It doesn't disincentivize work to get rid of it because you're still being rewarded for every amount you're working. It's really the artifact of previous tax reform that doesn't make sense in the system we have. They
Mm.
used to be $10,000. People wanted to interlock really precisely with the earned income tax credit. They moved it down to 3,000. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act moved down to 2,500. It no longer does anything. It just excludes some of the poorest family from claiming more of the credit. And if you get that out of the way, it's not that expensive. It's $1.5 billion a year, which is not that expensive in the context of this bill. It's very expensive in the context of my house, right?
Sure.
But you get a lot more of the money to families who really need it, who are earning it by working, um, and without having to add much to the total cost of the bill. I'd hate to see this pass and see all the benefits of the CTC expansion going to families like mine, where we're not sweating about money every month, and
Right,
not to families that really are going to see a positive pregnancy test and think, I don't know how we'll make rent if this happens.
right, right. And as you mentioned, it in so many cases it's not a tremendous amount of money that is going to change the mind of an abortion-minded woman who's feeling desperate. But another thing, I think this visual is always important. So many times it is a housing issue. So,
Hmm.
so I mean, we're literally talking about she's worried they won't have somewhere to sleep,
Exactly.
and so it's that fundamental. And when you say many women don't feel like they have a choice, that's what we're talking about. If what you're thinking is I'm going to be sleeping on concrete with my baby, that's not actually a choice.
No. Or in some cases, it's not going to be legal for me to stay where I currently live, which can happen,
Right,
including to folks who are in subsidized housing, but where there's a heartbeat rule, not the kind we're used to talking about, but of how many people can sleep in one room.
right,
And if you've got too many kids, you're crossing over that, you're going to lose your housing. And I think that's why we always have to think about there's a lot of different pieces to supporting vulnerable moms. There's some parts that can only be done through personal contact and private charity, right? Like you can have better support from the government through the CTC, but only the person from the Crisis Pregnancy Center is going to watch your kids while you pack. No one from the government can or is going to do that for you.
right, or
You
should.
know, you've got the other pieces which are much more whole society holistic, which is that rent should be cheaper. It would be cheaper if we let people build more apartments to meet the need of people in the busiest cities in the world. We've got too many places where it's illegal to build,
Mhm.
and we can't meet the needs of people who live in a city when we don't allow developers to build apartments to meet their need. So I'd love to see rent come down in that way. But
Mhm.
then there's really, on that person by person basis, the best the government can do is thinking about cash benefits like the tax credit that allow families to figure out, okay, well, we're pinched. Like, what are we going to do? Are we going to move kids all into the same room? Is that legal for us to do? Are we going to save on rent by not moving to a bigger place with our young kids and use that to buy food? Is this going to help us meet rent? But all the CTC can do is free parents to make good choices. It doesn't and shouldn't make those choices for them.
Sure. And I would also add to this as both conservatives who are pro-life but maybe not as intimately involved as some others are in trying to help meet needs or just simply write a check to the maternity center or the pregnancy care center that's closest to you. Um,
Mhm.
what often isn't fully realized is so yeah, we have government housing in every city, I believe. Um, uh, non-discrimination laws make it so that you can't necessarily, if you're not already in government housing or you're in government housing where it's only you or maybe it's only you and your husband, and now a child adding to the mix is going to change things. But if you're not in government housing and housing is your issue, they can't prioritize you just because you're pregnant. And
Mhm.
that also adds to a piece of this isn't necessarily choice. So to explain to a pro-choicer, but to explain to the pro-lifer, it's not like all the government funded things that exist are necessarily at the reach of this woman, which
Yeah.
is an important part of the conversation as
No,
well.
there's multi-years long waiting lists for supportive housing. So even once
Correct.
you qualify, it can be like, all right, well, we've got a baby coming, I've got a toddler, I can't make rent on the amount I make, for all these kids. What can I do? Like, oh, well, you definitely qualify for help. You're like, well, thank goodness. And I go,
Hmm.
and maybe in 6 years you'll come off the waiting list.
Right.
What good does 6 years do you while you're pregnant right now?
Well, and there are also scenarios too where you have to be in a shelter first before you
Yes.
can get on that waiting list. And for very prudent reasons, there are women who don't want to be in shelters.
Hmm.
And so that, yeah, that's all part of what could be a never-ending conversation. But as I want to be mindful of your time, so I just want to ask. So people who are paying attention right now, um, who care about families and maybe they're partially pro-choice because they want to know that a woman in a desperate situation has options, or maybe they're dyed in the wool pro-lifers, um, as they're paying attention vaguely to the child tax credit debate, what should they pay attention to? What should they voice to their senator?
I think for most people, the two things to pay attention to are what's that top line number? How big is the CTC going to be? And a number to keep in mind is 2,500. So I said it was 2,000 last year, but it was 2,000 in President Trump's first year when he expanded it. And if it had kept pace with inflation, it would be 2,500 now. So any number below 2,500 means that parents still aren't fully catching up to where they were in Trump's first term. And there's really no other major part of the tax code that works like that. My standard deduction doesn't get smaller every year relative to inflation. The tax brackets don't get smaller every year. The earned income tax credit doesn't get smaller. It's just the child tax credit where parents have been left falling behind relative to inflation. So hopefully we'll see that number go all the way up to 2,500 as the new baseline and indexed for inflation going forward. So parents don't see their benefits cut every year. It's
Right.
very weird. You wouldn't start with the assumption of all tax credits should keep pace with inflation except for kids, because kids get cheaper every year. So keep an eye on that top line number, that 2,500. Don't hesitate, to talk to your rep if you don't see that number where you want it. And then second, there's really the challenge of how much of that is fully refundable.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to stay at the 1,700 number where it's been even as the top line number goes up? Is there room to expand the total amount that's refundable that people can get, as a rebate essentially for their payroll tax? And if that number isn't going up, can it at least shift so it's more achievable? So pushing that blackout period down to nothing so that all your wages count for claiming the ACTC, that refundable part. Those are some things I'd keep an eye on.
And is that blackout part, is it realistic that it might die before the end of reconciliation and all?
I think so. I think here's the kind of cheering thing. There's no one with a principled commitment to it, right? That
Hmm.
2,500 number, as I said, it's arbitrary at this point. It went
Just
down from
left there.
10,000 to 3,000 to 2,500. I think, it's still around just as the way your appendix is, right? It used to serve a purpose in the tax code. It doesn't anymore, and no one's taken it out. And it's not too expensive to fix. And I think everyone knows if they've seen, kind of the distribution tables on this bill and the polling on this bill, that it's pretty urgent that both the House and the Senate find ways to make more of the benefits reach the most vulnerable households, that a lot of it's concentrated at the top right now. And this is a really natural place to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Leah, for taking the time. What are you focused most on in the coming days? You're writing up a storm as usual.
So at the Niskanen Center in the next couple of days, you're going to see a little menu from me on different ways the Senate and the House working together can improve the CTC proposals on the table. So I like where they've started, but I think it is really important to think about how you're going to reach the families who are most vulnerable and to make sure that every family realistically is going to see a benefit from this expansion, not just the families at the top. And of course, on the personal side, in October, I'll have The Dignity of Dependence coming out. And I'm really making the case for why any reasonable form of feminism is about advocating for women as women in a world that treats us like defective men. And that
Hmm,
really means especially keeping an eye on where we treat women as though we're not equal in dignity if we're not interchangeable with men.
right.
Women's fertility obviously being one of the biggest, most obvious ways we are not men and can't be expected to make ourselves men to be treated as equal.
And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg mentioned in one of her opinions that the whole sexual revolution has created these expectations on women that are just not natural. And so to be able to take a few steps back and have that conversation, I'm grateful that you're helping lead that.
Thank you so much.
And you showed a little window into you and Alexi's life together when you said that your child expenses are books and then child and toys. You did the books
And
first
pants. And
and
pants, right?
pants, yes, but I did note the books first.
Mhm.
Although it sounds like the pants might be the priority right now.
Well, we're getting it at both ends because we've got one kid potty training and one kid learning to read, and we have to keep her in enough new books that she can practice because she's so good at memorizing that
Oh
once she
wow.
goes through once or twice, she just is reciting the book. And we're like, but we need you to look at the letters, and then we have to find a new book she hasn't seen
Oh.
yet.
Oh, that's neat. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun, but a lot of
It
work too.
is.
Well, thank you again. And is X the best way to see the latest from you?
Yeah, that or otherfeminisms.com is
Okay.
another good way to keep up with what I'm doing.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Leah Sargeant. And thank you, everyone who's watching this. Please feel free to share and come back to nationalreview.com.
Sounds good.